Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 7th of June 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. Straight into Brexit without the exit, Mike.
Well, yes, David Davis was giving a speech yesterday on the future of the security partnership, and he's speaking at RUSI, at the RUSI Library in London. Future security partnership, defence is included in this as well. Well, they produced a nice little video clip all about the satellite systems that we are included in the European Union. So he said, well, he began by saying, as you alluded to, it's a pleasure to be speaking here at the Grand Library of the Royal United Services Institute. This think tank has for centuries hosted debates about matters of defence and security, and I thought that was a very interesting thing for a Minister of State or Secretary of State to say, because, I mean, RUSI was established in 1831, so clearly his understanding of time is somewhat different to mine. But anyway, maybe that explains why the Brexit process is taking so long to get sorted out. He went on to say, it is security that I want to talk about today, in the context of the overarching new partnership we want with the European Union after we leave. So again, an overarching new partnership. He said, while we can get bogged down in the day-to-day grumblings, we must not lose sight of the goal during these negotiations. That's why we've deliberately avoided tit-for-tat briefings out of the talks, because we've seen how it has damaged other European negotiations. He said, we, the British, are the champions of a rules-based international system, and worked to defend the security of people both here and abroad. So that is why we set out early and publicly, as the Deputy Director General said, our proposals to continue security cooperation with the EU. So Brexit without the exit. We are publishing detailed technical papers on specific issues such as Galileo and internal security on offer. On security and defence, our offer remains unconditional. So once again, a restatement that this is an unconditional offer. He said, well, he went on to list the sort of agencies that Britain would continue to be part of. Europol, for example, European Arrest Warrant, European Criminal Records Information System, Passenger Name Record Directive, and of course on foreign and defence policy. We will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies in Europe, and let's not forget Galileo. This means, he said, of course, we will make appropriate contributions to the costs of programmes we want to remain involved in, so we're going to keep paying in. When participating in EU agencies, the UK will respect the remit of the European Court of Justice. Now, this is a very significant point, because this is something which most Brexit campaigners believe that we would not be doing, that the European Court of Justice would have no jurisdiction over UK matters following our leaving the EU. But he's making it quite clear that when participating in EU agencies, European Court of Justice absolutely will have jurisdiction. And he said that when we leave the EU, our data sharing systems will be uniquely compatible with theirs, and our operational processes will already be closely aligned. And the fact that we will share those same laws and regulations on the day we leave, of course, helps. The unique starting point is a solid foundation of mutual trust for this new economic partnership that he went on to talk about. Now is the time, he said, to redouble our efforts to open our minds once again to build an enduring new partnership between the closest of friends and allies. And if we're to deliver a bright new future for the European Union and the United Kingdom. And Brian, I was fascinated by that final statement because he said he put the European Union first. This is the Brexit Minister, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, but he wants to offer or deliver a bright new future for the European Union before the United Kingdom. I thought that was pretty significant.
I think it is significant. As you mentioned earlier, Mike, these speeches get written in very careful language, every word, every sentence carefully considered. So it'd be no accident that the EU is put before UK. But I think I would add that, of course, we've seen David Cameron putting Israel before the UK and saying that his belief, his faith in Israel absolutely unshakable. That put UK second. So whatever it is about Britain's politicians, they do not want to put the interests of the British people first. There's always somebody else who is going to be given the lead position. Yes. It'd be interesting to really start asking the question, why do they do that? Who are these people?
Well, just before we move on from David Davis, of course, there's been a lot of furore in the mainstream press this morning about how beginning yesterday evening he started getting very upset because Theresa May was talking about a backstop position on the customs union, and this issue of the Northern Irish border continues to raise its ugly head. He's been meeting with Theresa May apparently today to try to get this issue resolved, but he was threatening to resign. This is just more nonsense from within the theatre. Yeah, is the right word. So we can probably give that a good ignoring.
We probably can. Unfortunately, we're not quite going to leave him, Mike. Let's just pop this up on screen because it's a little bit old. The information is a little bit old. We weren't able to pick up it at the time. We're now seeing it in new light. But what we're looking at is basically the UK government now admitting that it's unable to function on its own. We don't have a government system that can do the job. We need other people to help the UK government stagger through its work. And I'm going to say a very big thank you to the person who sent me an email saying, just have a look at this McKinsey tweet here. Now, of course, McKinsey, vast international management consultancy. And here was the one of interest. How do you implement a successful #government transformation? Our latest report, based on a global survey of 2,900 public servants and interviews with 30 plus senior leaders, highlight insights on what works. So here we've got the powerhouse of McKinsey, vast global company, and it's talking about transforming government. If you're not familiar with this organisation, well, as we always say, research it for yourself, get onto their website. This is just one of the advertising images, notes from the AI frontier. Our latest research goes deep on the potential of deep learning across 19 industries. So people can't look after themselves. The British can't govern themselves anymore because they, as we're about to see, need McKinsey. This is a little bit more of their blurb. Powered by knowledge, our work is funded on a rigorous understanding of every client's international context, sector dynamics, macroeconomic environment. For this reason, we invest more than 600 million of our firm's resources annually in knowledge development, learning, capability building. Well, and so it goes on, but we're about to see where at least some of their $600 million comes from. And let's bring back in this gentleman. And so here was the headline from, Financial News. This is from a few weeks ago, but it said that McKinsey wins 1.5 million UK Brexit contract. US consulting firm has been tapped to organise more than 700 government plans relating to Brexit. So this is fantastic stuff, Mike. We've got a government that can't govern without the help of a profit-making consultancy. And this consultancy is going to be looking after more than 700 government plans. Are all the individuals security cleared? Are they loyal to UK? What are these people's interests? We have no idea, but the Conservative government has simply opened the door and brought them in. So who is actually looking after Brexit at the moment? Is it David Davis or is it a profit-making US consultancy?
Well, I mean, this is a bit of a kick in the teeth to the civil service, is it not? Because surely that's their role.
It is, and as always, Mike, well spotted, because we'll have a mention of that. But here's consultancy.uk. Really encourage people to go and have a look at this report, because the first thing I picked up on here is it said Brexit department picks McKinsey for 1.9 million consulting contract. So the contract had already gone out 400,000. Why was that? Well, they put the tender out at 1.5 million. But by the time they got interested in McKinsey, it had gone up to 1.9 million. So that's pretty good. But what does the text say? We chose McKinsey and Company have been revealed as the consultancy to have successfully obtained a sought-after government tender for the implementation of nearly 800 Brexit-related plans. The contract helps further paper the cracks of Whitehall following the extensive streamlining of the British civil service in recent years, while the future hiring of some 5,000 staff is likely to further boost operations ahead of the 2019's deadline for negotiations with Brussels. So now we're getting into the meat of it, because basically the Conservatives have been slaughtering the civil service, and now we've got something really important to do. We haven't got those people. We haven't got British people being paid. So what are we going to do? We're going to give more of the money of the British public to American profit-making companies. So there was more in this article. Well, I'd encourage people to go and have a read. It says the hiring of McKinsey comes after a period in which Conservative ministers have been single-minded in their efforts to slim down Whitehall departments in the name of a more efficient government. And on it goes. It says that Department for Exit from the EU has struggled to hire and retain talent since taking the drastic measure of hiring an extra 3,000 civil servants, and it's expecting to employ a further 5,000 next year. This is government out of control, Mike. We've got the lies of austerity, and we'll be coming on to banking a little bit later. We've got the slaughter of the civil service, and what do we do now? We give more British money to US consultancies. So it's pretty interesting. But it gets better, because Politico reported here on future customs arrangement that another £680,000 of public money had been given away. Where do you think that might have gone, Mike? Well, surprise, surprise, it happens to have gone into McKinsey again. Government records show the UK Tax Authority, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, spent £680,000 on a contract with consultancy firm McKinsey and Company. But they produced the plans, but they got rejected. So that was £680,000 just thrown away.
Yes.
But same company that gets the initial contract. So is this a contract to make your own money? Possibly. But what are we also interested in, apart from the Brexit shambles? Well, of course, what McKinsey is really up to is promoting world government policy. And if we have a look at their tweets here, what we can see very clearly is that they are promoting cities, which are becoming the, quote, switchboards of the globalised economy. So is this the policy they're putting into the government? I would suspect it is. And then the second one, it says, this week, we, McKinsey and Company, we're releasing new insights into smart cities and sizing up the impact technology can have for residents. So who's running Britain at the moment? Is it the Conservatives backed by Russian money, or is it now US profit-making companies?
Yes. We have some good news, however, Brian.
Thank you.
Excellent. Good news, because, well, the F-35, four of them, in fact, have arrived in the UK. This is fantastic. The first of Britain's next generation fighter jets have arrived home 2 months ahead of schedule in a major milestone for the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. We mentioned this when Gavin Williamson had said it was going to happen a few weeks ago, but it has now happened. So the first four of these new cutting-edge aircraft have arrived into RAF Marham, their new home, after a big upgrade there. It's going to be called 617 Squadron, after the Dambuster Squadron. That's what they've decided to call it. And their arrival 2 months ahead of schedule provides apparently an opportunity for support staff to get a head start in getting the aircraft ready for operational service this year. So £550 million invested in RAF Marham. That's mainly resurfacing the runway and so on, all this kind of stuff, a few extra buildings. Well, this autumn, the first landing is going to take place on HMS Queen Elizabeth. I hope it goes very well for them. It remains to be seen whether RAF personnel experience the same potentially life-threatening problems that
with the oxygen
supplies,
yeah.
And a host of other other issues. Gavin Williamson was very excited about it, of course. But you got anything to...
Well, I was just going to say, I understand that the government's very pleased that this is good for money and jobs.
Well, in the little video there, it did say that that this was good for money and jobs because, of course, this is a $1.3 trillion contract to build 3,000 aircraft, and the UK industry gets 15% of that allegedly, and apparently this makes economic impact greater because if we had made 100% of the 138 aircraft that we need, then we wouldn't have made so much money.
So if we'd made our own aircraft for another company, overseas company, to make profit, we wouldn't have made as much as having 15% of a 1.3 trillion. But what they don't say is, of course, if we had simply designed and built our own aircraft, which as a leading world state we should be able to do, we wouldn't have this problem in the first place.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, brilliant. Well done, Theresa May and Gavin Williamson, of
course.
Well,
it does amuse me slightly that I'm not allowed to know the details of the department in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that's responsible for counter-disinformation on national security grounds, but it's okay that we buy aircraft from a generic supplier in another country who's selling the same aircraft to goodness knows how many other countries, that we have no control over who else gets hold of these aircraft, and we could find ourselves fighting the same aircraft that we have with the same capabilities at some point in the future. Well, surely that's a slightly bigger national security issue.
It'd be unreasonable for any normal person to be allowed to have that information, Mike, clearly.
Yes, but let's stick with national security issues. So this is a fascinating development, actually. I think this is a Spectator, a very English coup d'etat. This is an article by Gwithian Prince, who's an academic board member for Veterans for Britain. He is an emeritus research professor at the London School of Economics. For 20 years previously, he was a fellow tutor and director of studies at Emmanuel College, Cambridge. And he's a friend of Sir Richard Dearlove, who was master until quite recently of Emmanuel College. And they both write for Brexit Central, amongst other places. And he's currently a member of the Chief of Defence Staff Strategy Advisory Panel and the Royal Marines Advisory Group. He's an honorary member of both the Royal Naval Special Boat Service and the Army Intelligence Corps. And he's also served in many public service roles since 1990s at NATO within the UK Ministry of Defence and as advisor to several governments on issues of energy and climate change. So this is somebody who's pretty close to the establishment, and I noticed connections with Richard Dearlove, which puts him right in the heart of the group of people that were attempting to get rid of Trump through the dodgy dossiers, Christopher Steele and others, right? So including Richard Dearlove. So this is quite a fascinating article from a fascinating individual, and he says that they say the devil is in the detail. And it certainly is the case with government's Brexit plans on defence and security. On May 24th, Gavin Williamson delivered a major speech on defence at the first Sea Lords Sea Power Conference. It was a good speech, but then under cover of the positive news coverage, which it attracted, the Department for exiting the EU slipped out a technical note. They must have hoped nobody would notice. This technical note spelled out government's ambitions for a deep and special partnership with the EU in defence and security after Brexit. But as I explained in two reports published in May for the Briefings on Brexit website, Britain does not need such a relationship with the EU after we leave. And he goes on to talk about his joint article with Sir Richard Dearlove on this issue. He talks about the Kit Kat tapes, which we've covered on this programme. But getting back to the technical note, he says in Articles 6 and 14, we find ambitions to share intelligence and analysis that could imperil our real defence alliance through Five Eyes and the USA. As Sir Richard and I warned, this would be a threat to national security. Instead, we should break out of Galileo, in which we are the dominant force, and build our own satellites. It gets worse. In Article 18, it says that it intends to achieve a bespoke administrative agreement with the European Defence Agency. It agrees arrangements for participation in the Commission's European Defence Fund, to have the option to participate in PESCO as a third party, and to access commercial opportunities. But he goes on to say, we have formally stated we will not be in PESCO, but as the UK column's been saying for some time, we clearly view that as a lie. And he goes on to say, or he ends up by saying, in my Hotel California article, I warned that civil servants were planning to allow us to check out of the EU, but to never actually leave. None of the technical notes plans have been submitted for scrutiny and a vote in Parliament. Doesn't the Department for Exiting the EU feel uncomfortable about that? Perhaps they don't think they have a snowball's chance in hell of winning support in Parliament or in the country. If so, they should agree to withdraw the September 17th and May 18th partnership papers and the sneaky technical note right now. So, Brian, it's a good article. It covers many of the issues that we've been talking about over a long period of time, and it's quite specific about this technical note and the problems with it. But I'm fascinated about who's writing this and his connections to the intelligence services and why this is being published in The Spectator. So I think we'll look at that in more detail.
We'll dig deeper, yes. And also I think we can expect David Ellis to make some comment on this as well. But one thing that's true to say, Mike, is nothing we look at is ever black and white. It's always shades of grey. And I think as we are starting to see cracks in the establishment, people who are not fully on side, as it were, in one area are starting to pay attention in others. And this is basically good news, but they've got to be watched very carefully and pushed to stay on the right path. Well, some really shocking news here. Don't really know how to put this on screen. But apparently the Russians are, I better underline it, not to blame. What are they not to blame for? Well, actually, they're not to blame for a cyber attack. So I thought we'd just bring this on screen.
Wow. I
can imagine people will not believe this. Where have we got this from? Well, it comes back to the problems that the US Navy's been having, and in particular their Pacific Fleet, which has been running aground or bumping into other ships to such a scale that the US Navy has had a major investigation. Defence News here reporting troubling US Navy review finds widespread shortfalls in basic seamanship. That's a bit of an understatement. But let's bring in the Russians. Navy crews at fault in fatal collisions. Investigations find. Here's the hotspot down here. They're talking about the McCain had a collision with an oil and chemical tanker. This is very serious and tragic stuff because a total of 17 sailors died in collisions for 2 ships. They find that there was a series of mistakes with the ship's bridge watch standards and heavy risks assumed by the commanding officer in a busy shipping lane. That was for the McCain. But here's the bit. It says the reports issued to the public, while incomplete, put to rest a parade of wild theories that arose on the wake of the shocking accidents, which assigned responsibility for the incidents to everything from terrorism to Chinese or Russian cyber attacks. So there we are. Nothing to do with the Russians and cyber attacks. This was, in fact, what some have called criminal incompetence by the US Navy. And it is remarkable what's going on here, Mike, because this is very, very serious stuff if a fleet can't actually manage to sail around the world without bumping into things. So this is one of the pictures that was put forward in Defence News. You can see the big hole, the big hole in Ukraine, in McCain there. And this is the article in which commentary on it was made by Captain Rick Hoffman, retired cruiser captain. He had a look at the documents that Defence News was able to get hold of. The thing that stood out to me was in both situations they had minimal situational awareness. He said in the case of Fitzgerald, nearly criminal negligence on the part of the bridge watch team, and in neither case did the ship sound 5 short blasts or raise the general alarm to let anyone know that they were in danger. The significance of the 5 short blasts is to warn other ships that you're in danger of colliding, but the general alarm is so important because when that alarm goes off in the ships, people would have been out their bunks in an instant. But in the case of these collisions, some of the sailors, the first they knew was a bang, and then they'd got water coming in over their heads. So this is very, very serious. But I'm going to bring people's attention back to this gentleman called Gerald Atkinson. He was a former lieutenant commander in the US Navy. And back in 1999 and earlier, he was warning that there was an attack on the efficiency of the US military. And what he started to talk about were the transformers who were bringing in what he described as Frankfurt School changes to the training and the behavior of recruits. This wasn't just in the United States Navy, it was in the military, the army structure as well. But he took this all the way back to the Frankfurt School and was warning that there was a deliberate attempt from inside the US to undermine its own military. And of course, we're now seeing the fruits of this plan. If it was one ship, it could just be an incident, but of course it's not been one ship, it's been a whole series of incidents, including the loss of aircraft over the Pacific Fleet. So I think the Americans are in deep trouble here, and this is a whole change which is impacting on the efficiency of their military structure. It's almost as though America's military is being undermined from the inside, Mike. And just in case somebody says that I'm picking on the United States Navy, I thought we'd just remind people that the trial of former Royal Navy Commander Charles Howson goes on at the moment, and that's one count of attempted buggery, which he denies. But of course, a little while ago, he was found guilty of a total of 10 counts of indecent assault on 8 young men. So this is a particularly incredible thing. Can't talk too much at the moment, as obviously the court case is going on, but there are a number of questions to be asked about what the Royal Navy did at the time, it would appear, to cover up the abuse of young sailors on board British warships. So maybe not a good time for the military at the moment.
Just wanted to say a huge thank you to Justin S., who made quite a spectacular donation to the UK column today. Thank you very much for that. John B. as well actually met. He'd made a similar donation just about the time of the Media on Trial event, and met him at that and was able to say thank you in person, which is very nice. But John, to Justin S., thank you very much for that today. Now, this evening, Ian Crane in the studio, Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 this evening. This is part 2 of the interview with Graham Downing on the issue of deaths in the NHS. And following that at 9 o'clock, Fracking Nightmare. So Ian is doing a Fracking Nightmare this week. Anti-fracking, he says, is now at the forefront of a civil rights campaign. He's talking about corporate injunctions, which he is calling TTIP via the back door, and an erosion of civil liberties, and also the Northern Powerhouse, or is it the Northern Sacrifice Zone? So he'll be talking about Greg Clark has his application to frack Preston New Road near Blackpool from Quadrilla on his desk. However, Freedom of Information requests prove that there's no emergency response plan in place. So we'll be talking about that later on. What's next? Right, war. The drive for war continues, apparently. So, well, this is quite interesting. Sweden has mobilised all its reserves, according to RT, for the first time in 40 years. And they're saying for the first time since the height of the Cold War, Sweden has called its entire Home Guard force, 22,000 reservists, for snap exercises. The drills were supposed to bolster the country's defensive and operational capabilities. They mobilised all 40 Home Guard battalions in an unprecedented exercise that has not taken place in 1975, and they marked the National Day of Sweden, celebrated on the 6th of June. Our mission is to strengthen Sweden's military defence and improve our operational capabilities, according to Supreme Commander Michael Biden. We're testing the chain of mobilisation for around half our organisation, something we've not done since 1975. How significant do you think that is?
Well, that it's a full-scale mobilisation, Mike, has got to be taken. A lot of money's being spent to do it, but I think a lot of this is also theatre. This is to help ramp up the idea that countries are reacting to a supposed Russian threat. So I detect theatre here.
Well, let's continue with the theatre then, because the NATO defence ministers meeting is taking place today and tomorrow. And Jens Stoltenberg was previewing it yesterday. He said that he expects that they will agree our new joint force command for the Atlantic, which will be based in Norfolk in the United States, and a new enabling command, which will be based in Ulm in Germany. He expects that they'll also agree to a NATO readiness initiative, the 430s they're calling it. This would mean that the Allies would have by 2020 30 mechanised battalions, 30 air squadrons and 30 combat vessels ready within 30 days or less. This is not about setting up or deploying new forces, he says. It's about boosting the readiness of existing forces. He said all allies have now stopped the cuts in defence spending and started to increase, so that's good. So Donald Trump's threat last year seems to have worked. And he said he would be able to announce the first figures for 2018 on Thursday, that's today, calling defence investment a matter of fairness and security in a more unpredictable world. He said that we're going in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go. So that's fantastic. But tomorrow they will be talking NATO-EU cooperation with his girlfriend, High Representative / Vice President Federica Mogherini, as well as colleagues from Finland and Sweden. And they're going to point towards having made some fantastic concrete progress, such as real-time warnings about cyber attacks and complementary maritime operations. And he said that going forward, military mobility could become a flagship for cooperation. Now, this is a really important point because the European Commission and Federica Mogherini are proposing this idea of this military Schengen, whereby troops from any EU state can move freely without any, so much as a buy your leave, through any member state. Well, I mean, where are they going to move from? They're going to move from the west towards the east. And this is something that was being tested during this latest NATO exercise, which is taking place in Poland and the Baltic states at the moment. And then they're also going to have a meeting on Afghanistan together with partners that are contributing to the Resolute Support Mission. Allies and partners are stepping up, he said, with both forces and funding. So that's fantastic. So the charade continues. And I just wanted to, this was sent to me yesterday by one of our local supporters, so thank you very much for that. This is the NATO Science and Technology Organization. And he just wanted to highlight the scale of the amount of work that's being done on AI and deep learning and so-called cyber. So if we just scroll down through some of these contracts, you can freeze the screen at various points and have a look at them. But there are lots and lots of programs, efforts in this area, huge quantity of it. Well, I'm not going to say any more about it at this point. It's something we're going to continue to look at. But I just thought it was interesting to look at the number of projects in this area.
Yeah, but what we're seeing, Mike, is clearly increasing militarization of the West with the objective of what? A war in the East,
yes,
it would appear. Okay, well, all this requires money, and we're going to recommend this book, which we've known about for a little while. It's called Alice and the Money Tree. It's described as an illustrated beginner's guide to money and its hidden political and economic impact on society, all being told in a Lewis Carroll style narrative and verse. I've read it. I found it extremely interesting and very clever. And we've been offered this book to obviously help the author get people to read it, but also this will bring in a little bit of money for the UK column. So hopefully we'll be able to advertise that on the website shortly. But I think it's a really excellent piece of work. And the idea is to help people understand the fraud of the international banking system in an enjoyable read. So thank you very much to J.M. Weston Briggs, who's the gentleman who produced it.
Now, you were talking about the fact that the government can't operate without external assistance earlier, and McKinsey and whatnot. Well, it goes further than that, because here's Liam Fox, Well, they have announced that the Department for International Trade has appointed Citigroup's banking vice chairman, Mark Slaughter, as Director General for Investment. And that's apparently he's going to lead a drive to attract more investment into the UK. So that's fantastic, isn't it? Mark Slaughter is the latest in a series of high-profile appointments from the private sector to the top team at the Department for International Trade, including senior Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner roles, leading trade and investment overseas. So Slaughter is, as I say, the latest, and that follows John Mann, who was former head of Barclays, head of corporate banking. So he's gone in to lead the Department for International Trade's exporting function. So it seems like bankers moving into the Department for International Trade. And the question is, why would that be? Well, of course, TTIP has more or less failed at a European level, at an EU level at least. But Brexit, one of the things that's happening under the guise of Brexit is that Britain has created this new hashtag Global Britain. We're going to be leading the world in free trade. And we're going to do that by creating a host of bilateral trading agreements with a host of different countries, including the EU. My personal belief is that the intention there is to build something which looks very similar to TTIP. Will have many of the features of TTIP, including dispute resolution, the idea that corporate bodies would be able to sue countries. That's on the cards for this, and they're bringing in the banking sector to make sure that this works all very well.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yes.
Well, of course, the NHS has been getting a slightly different attention, and we'd like to thank local supporter of UK Column for highlighting this. It's Freedom of Information correspondence with the East Midlands Ambulance Service. Why is this important? Because it's absolutely highlighted the fact we have more privatisation of NHS services hidden in plain sight. Some of this was reported in the so-called mainstream press and media, but it was drifted in very casually. Most people didn't see it or read it or understand the significance of it. These letters beef the whole thing up. So I've just taken a couple of excerpts, but the response here from East Midlands Ambulance Service says, it has been agreed by the board that third-party engagement is currently utilised in support of the ambulance services frontline service provision, where demand has been identified as requiring urgent reinforcement. The engagement with third-party providers for additional provision is completed through the tendering process, and then when operational forms part of the normal operational business. So we've got everything there. We're tendering, we've got contracts, and we've got business running on all around trying to get people into hospital. And this is the key bit here, because in this is a table of different organisations that have got these contracts. We've got Amvale Medical Transport, Bristol Ambulance, British Red Cross, Central Medical Services, Elite, Complete Tenders EMS Limited, Heart Medical, Jigsaw Medical Services, Location Medical Services Limited, Medipro Clinical Services. So it goes on. And they say that these and a number of other third-party providers form part of a framework who can bid for any new tenders. The companies within this framework are based throughout the UK and will provide a temporary base within the operational locations required if they cannot cover it from one of their current locations. So we can't run an ambulance service within the NHS. That's all effectively been privatised, but people still don't want to talk about it. So these are just some of the organisations who've won the contract. One of the things we notice is very often you'd be hard-pressed to know that their ambulance is different from the real thing. Don't know whether that's just by coincidence or not. But these are some of the firms, and you can look up these yourself. So privatisation in front of our very eyes. And let's remind ourselves.
Sorry, just before we remind ourselves about
Mr. Streeter.
Mr. Streeter,
Yeah.
it does seem to. The question I'd like to understand about this is that emergency services, properly constituted emergency services in this country, are entitled under certain circumstances to break the law. So, for example, going through red lights, going faster than the speed limit, and so on. I wonder very much how this applies to these private services. If they're being contracted to carry out paramedic, which some of these are, how does this apply to them, and what protections do they have?
Well, I would imagine they would claim exactly the same protection. So we would now have private companies being allowed to break the law when they think it's appropriate to do so. But it's a very interesting situation. Let's come back to Mr. Streeter, because of course it was local Plymouth MP Gary Streeter who wrote this astonishing piece in a local paper where he says, "I hear from lots of constituents who have all kinds of ideas that I consider to be untrue, ranging from a secret Tory plan to privatise the NHS to, quote, conspiracy theories about the 2001 Twin Tower atrocities, passing through MI5, trying to control their minds through electronic harassment." So this man is arrogant enough to say to anybody who points out the evidence in front of our eyes that the NHS is being privatised by the Tories, that you are some stupid conspiracy theorist. This is the arrogance of our MPs, and I just wonder, does he really know what's going on? I'd remind people about this because, of course, it was the UK column that has been warning about people inside the NHS and inside government calling themselves disruptors. And here was Dominic Campbell, have a look on his Twitter page if you haven't come across him before, saying, how do we disrupt? I replied basically saying this man's talking about disrupting local government. If you do this inside the NHS, people are going to die. So very sinister stuff. We need to understand the disruptors.
Now, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2016, a new statutory instrument came into force a few days ago. And Patrick Henningsen sent me some responses that he had from people regarding this. And I just wanted to make a couple of points about this. First of all, people are saying things like, from the creation of this statutory instrument, which came into force, I think, on the 31st of May, from then on, there are new communications regulations. All calls are recorded, all phone call recordings are saved, WhatsApp is monitored, Twitter is monitored, Facebook is monitored, all social media and forums are monitored. Inform those who don't know your devices are connected to ministry systems. Take care not to send unnecessary messages. Inform your children, relatives and friends about this to take care. And so it went on. And a couple of other similar reactions to this, pretty hysterical actually. Because, of course, there's a couple of points about the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. This behaviour, this surveillance, has been going on for many years, illegally. And one of the points about the Investigatory Powers Act is that it attempts to retrospectively make bad behaviour legal. So we shouldn't be surprised that this type of thing is going on. But of course, content of calls isn't being recorded as a routine. Yes, internet service providers and telephone companies are having to record the metadata, like who made calls, who did they make the calls to, when were the calls made, how long did they last, but they can't, they're not in a position to record the content of calls without a warrant at this point. And WhatsApp, of course, Twitter, these have been monitored not just by the companies themselves, but by government for quite some time in the security services. And this idea that we should take care not to send unnecessary messages, this is just nonsense. What we want to do is do the opposite. We want to send as many unnecessary messages as we possibly can, overwhelm the system as much as we possibly can.
And give them something to do.
Give them something to do, yes,
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a sad story.
Well, look, this one, I just wanted to highlight this. A 100-year-old dies after street mugging. This is a tragic story. There's been a lot of stuff in the press at the moment about street muggings and drive-by on mopeds, stealing of watches and all this kind of stuff. And of course, in the day, you know, anybody that suggests we should be going back to having bobbies on the beat, that might be viewed as nostalgic. You know, we can't do that. So what are we going to have instead? Well, of course, this type of headline is going to be driving people towards demands for an empowered police force, perhaps weaponized with guns and so on. And in fact, we're not looking at the opportunity to go back to bobbies on the beat. I think we absolutely should have, because these people understood their communities. They knew who was in their communities. They were able to recognize very quickly when people that weren't supposed to be there were there. And so they were quite effective at preventing crime. But we're moving towards this new uber surveilled state.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, headlines like this, as tragic as this story is, are driving that forward.
Well, the police not there to assist that 100-year-old lady. However, the police, of course, do appear when we have people's homes been taken off them. I'd just like to say we put out this appeal yesterday for people to help Julia Langmaid, who's facing having her late husband's home taken from her in Bristol. Now, I had a call from her earlier on. She's actually been in court trying to get a stay on what's been happening. I haven't got the latest on that, but I know there was some talk of trying to move the case from Bristol down to Exeter, possibly to Plymouth. So firstly, to say thank you to people who did respond and offer help, but to reiterate that this is the status of UK at the moment, that we have people's homes being taken from them under false pretences, and this can only be done with the full connivance of both of law firms and the courts themselves. So this is very, very dangerous stuff. And if there's anybody thinking, oh well, it wouldn't happen to my house, or it couldn't, or my home, it couldn't happen to my children, we're going to say, think again, because this is now encroaching on people who in their own way may be really quite wealthy and quite powerful within the establishment. They are also now falling foul of this encroaching criminal activity. How to stop it? We need to talk about it. We need to expose it. And of course, we need to be saying we've had enough of it. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And a big thank you as well to the people who have donated to UK Column recently. And also just to say, if you're not a subscriber, please consider taking out that subscription because that gives us steady income. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.